Warning: these social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre.
Good morning, everybody. How we doing? Spectre here. It is the 3rd day of November on this Wednesday, hump day. Good to have you aboard here. It is a little bit chipper in this part of the country. Sun is shining, can't complain. A little bit chilly, a little frost on the ground for this time of year, but hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully your weather is cooperative wherever you may be here in this country or overseas, wherever you may be tuning in from. Got a lot of ground to cover here this morning on the broadcast. We'll take a quick look through the oil markets here, see what's shaking there. Talk a little bit about skilled labor. I got ADP print and that came through here, just a little bit ago. Talk a little bit about Zillow and their earnings, and we've been tracking that over recent days. Bed Bath & Beyond, a little bit in the news, as well as some commodities by way of natural gas, coal, things of that nature, energy, all that stuff we're going to touch on here in the broadcast, so stick around. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, Spectre here. Want to tell you about my Teespring store that I just opened up with a handful of products in that for you guys, the listeners, the audience, those that are in chat on a day in, day out basis. Always appreciate your support, and I figured what the heck, we'll throw some merch out there for you guys. And so obviously with YouTube and Earth Shenanigans as of late, I'm going to be looking to expand to other platforms, and well, it all comes at a cost, so I figured what the heck. That being said, I got some t-shirts and that out here. You can see those in black, white, and gray. Spectre Does News. Got a water tumbler, 20 ounce there. Got a coffee mug you can get in black or white. And of course, we got the Let's Go Brandon #FJB shirt, which you can also find in black, white, or gray. Right now, you can find that all over at https specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. That's https://specters-storefront.creator-spring.com. Thank you for your support.
All right into it we go here this morning. Iron ore futures stumble sub 100 as China steel output slumps. That's the opening headline here this morning as we take a quick roll through the oil markets as iron ore futures in Singapore dove under. Oops, I'm actually on the wrong one. I apologize. Let's start with this guy. Futures flat ahead of historic taper announcement. We'll touch on that one here in just a minute. China warns of downward pressure on economy. U.S. stock futures were flat ahead of today's Fed meeting, with the central bank, or where the central bank is widely expected to announce the reduction of asset purchases, with a majority of analysts expecting the Fed reducing its monthly purchases of treasuries by $10 billion and mortgage-backed securities by $5 billion. And just as a reminder, they have been purchasing, about $120 billion with an 80-40 split since, probably February, March of last year. So you can do the math. Nasdaq 100 futures climbed 0.1%, while S&P 500 and Dow Jones futures were little changed. Oil fell as the U.S. ramped up pressure on OPEC Plus to boost supplies, which will bear zero results, by the way, because creepy Uncle Joe is not a very good negotiator. And of course, the 2-year Treasury yield was steady, while the 30-year rate shed was 2 basis points. European stocks struggled for direction and the dollar fell less than 0.1%. There we see the E-mini S&P futures here tracking this morning. So despite turmoil in the bond market, which sent the MOVE, or Bond Volatility Index, to post-COVID highs, here we see that tracking, stocks remain complacent and are likely not under stress because we all think we know what will come out from today's meeting. A gradual start of the tapering of the bond purchase program, said IPEC Ozkardaskaya. And that one's a tough one to say. I have to practice that one. Senior analyst at Swissquote. A taper announcement will likely be seamless, which may be seamless to end is the rate direct discussion, she wrote in a note. In recent weeks, policymakers have come under pressure to reassess their assessment of inflation being transitory, with bond and currency markets pricing in faster than expected rate hikes. The big question will be whether they will signal anything about when the rate hikes will start, Janet Garrity, chief economist at Robertson Stephens Wealth Management, said on Bloomberg Television. I think they are going to try and avoid that. So, flashing forward into some of the notable pre-market moves, Lyft rose after its third quarter results showed a continued improvement in key metrics for the ride-sharing company. Zillow dropped as the decision to shut its home flipping business raised questions about its ability to deliver growth. As mentioned at the top of the broadcast, we're going to get into that here momentarily. Shale oil producer Devon Energy rose 4.8% in pre-market trading on topping earnings estimates as oil prices hit multi-year highs. Mondelez International added 1.9% after the Oreo maker raised its annual sales forecast, helped by price increases and strong demand from emerging markets. T-Mobile gained 3.4% after the U.S. wireless carrier beat third quarter estimates for adding monthly bill-paying phone subscribers. Activision Blizzard tumbled 12% after the video game publisher delayed the launch of two much-awaited titles, as its co-leader Jen O'Neill decided to step down from her role. And so we flash forward into the old market snapshot. S&P 500 futures little changed at 46.22 even. Stocks Europe 600 little changed at 479.79. Nikkei down 0.4% to 29,520 and change. Shanghai Composite down 0.2% to 3498.54. Looks like Euro little changed at 1.1587. Brent futures down 1.8% to 83.23 a barrel. Gold spot down 0.3% to 1782.83 an ounce. And the US dollar index little changed at 94.05. Out of Bloomberg, in the overnight hours, we get the Federal Reserve as widely expected to announce the reduction of asset purchases at the conclusion of its policy meeting Wednesday, which Chair Jerome Powell will likely say is not a step toward raising interest rates anytime soon. Traders have had a mixed view for most of this year about when emerging Asia central banks will begin to normalize policy. Suddenly, though, they are rushing to price in rate hike bets across the region. The hawkish shift is most evident in South Korea and India, where markets are now anticipating at least a quarter-point increase in the next 3 months, while they are also building in Malaysia and Thailand over a 2-year horizon. China's economy faces new downward pressure and has to cut taxes and fees to address the problems faced by small and medium-sized companies, according to the country's Premier Li Keqiang. More provinces in China are fighting COVID-19 than at any time since the deadly pathogen first emerged in Wuhan in 2019. Also, the likelihood that elevated inflation will become entrenched is increasing, according to European Central Bank Governing Council member Bastian Vassal. So, over to Asia we go. Out of News Squawk, State Bank of India profit top estimates on lower provisions. Chinese copper smelters boost exports to ease historic squeeze. China's PBOC says digital yuan users have surged to 140 million, and Malaysia holds rates on recovery, benign inflation outlook. Back over to Europe, BMW muscles through chip shortage with profit jump. Nexans drops as Morgan Stanley says third quarter results were weak. Russia's biggest alcohol retailer seeks $1.3 billion in an IPO. And LSE boss expects London will keep EU clearing role post-Brexit. And as far as event calendar, kind of a busy day here today. 8:15 a.m. this morning, we got October ADP employment change, estimate of 400,000. Prior was 568,000. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a bit. 9:45 a.m. October market U.S. services PMI, estimate of 58.2. Prior the same. Also October market U.S. composite PMI. Prior was a 57.3. 10 a.m., we got September durable goods orders, estimate down 0.4%, prior was the same. September less transportation, estimate of 0.4, prior the same. September cap goods orders, non-defense, ex-air, prior was a 0.8%. September cap goods ship, non-defense, ex-air, prior was a 1.4%. Also 10 a.m., September factory orders, estimate of 0.1, prior was a 1.2. September factory orders ex-trans, estimate of 0, prior was up 0.5%. Also at 10 a.m., October ISM services index, estimate of 62, prior was a 61.9. And then, of course, the 2 p.m. today, the FOMC rate decision. So a little bit going on here today. And on top of that, we got some earnings net coming through. Before bell today, we got CVS Health coming through. We got Capri, Discovery, to name a few. And then we got Roku, Qualcomm, Etsy. So we got a little retail and communications net coming through after bell today. And yeah, got a couple other major ones coming up later in the week as well. So outside of that, Micro says this: today's skilled labor shortage is no surprise. This out of PJ Media yesterday says, if anyone could rightly say, I told you so, when it comes to the sad state of America's workforce, it's Mike Rowe, host of the hit TV series Dirty Jobs. It says 13 years ago, the Micro Works Foundation began a campaign to bring awareness about the 2.3 million skilled jobs that were open across the country. Today, that number is approaching 11 million, said Rowe on Facebook. Of note, most of those open jobs do not require a 4-year degree. They require training. Says, I am not surprised by today's headlines or by what's happened to our workforce, he said. I'm not surprised that many of America's critical industries are still struggling to fill millions of skilled positions. I am not surprised that millions of parents and corporations still believe a 4-year degree is the best path for the most people. I'm not surprised that student loans now eclipse 1.7 trillion, and I'm not surprised that airlines are canceling flights right and left. What really surprises Rowe is why anyone is surprised at all. How could anyone be surprised that after we told an entire generation that they had no hope of succeeding without a college degree, we'd end up with 1.7 trillion in student debt and tuition, so exorbitantly expensive, when the government encourages everyone to borrow whatever it costs to get a diploma, and then forgive the debt? Asked Rowe. I'm certainly not surprised, but no one made students sign those loan papers. How could anyone be surprised there's a shortage of pilots or other skilled airport workers after an untold number have refused a vaccine mandate? We can discuss the wisdom or the foolishness of complying, but how can anyone be surprised that millions of workers in many critical industries have resisted the Biden mandate, he said. How can we be surprised by the nearly 11 million open jobs and labor shortage when there's a massive skills gap and has been for years? It's a reflection of what we value. Unfortunately, many Americans don't value skilled labor, Rose said. If you're not grateful to the people who bring you affordable energy, plentiful food, smooth roads, heating, air conditioning, steel production, or indoor plumbing, you probably won't encourage your kids to explore careers in those fields. So why then would anyone be surprised when millions of people choose to accept money from the government instead of exploring ways to get the training they need to fill any of those open positions? You also probably aren't likely to teach your kids the value of real, honest-to-goodness physical work either. While Rose says he can't foretell the future, he's afraid things must sometimes go splat before the masses wake up. In the case of America's workforce, he's not certain what splat will look like, but if he were to guess, he said, it will involve a serious spike in the cost of food, energy, and construction. A lot of packages are not going to be delivered on time. The skilled labor shortage, like airline travel, he guessed, will most likely get worse before it gets better. Be sure to allow extra time, my fellow Americans, and encourage your kids and grandkids to gain a valuable skill instead of worthless student debt. Pretty valuable words out of Mike Rowe, who has opined about this time and time again, that yes, indeed, we do have a skilled labor shortage. People not willing to go get the skills needed for otherwise would be considered dirty jobs, right? I guess in this day and age when everybody gamifies stock trading through apps like Robinhood and things of those nature, and of course the old Federal Reserve backstops everything and promises that you'll never lose, well, gee, what's the incentive, right? You can either do that or wait for the old scraps to fall off Nancy Antoinette's desk your way, right? So in any case, Zillow fires 25% of workforce, scraps robo-flipping program after a huge loss. We've been talking about Zillow and their woes as of late in the housing market. So we find out yesterday, on Monday, reported that Zillow Group had halted its AI-powered house flipping operation after 93% of homes listed in their Phoenix portfolio are underwater, and is scrambling to unload 7,000 homes for $2.8 billion. Today, the company announced during earnings that it's going to reduce its workforce by 25% and completely scrap its home flipping operation, which began buying homes in December 2019. The decision comes after the company lost more than $380 million on the program called Zillow Offers, which hit a major snag in recent months after the algos monumentally overpaid for houses right as the U.S. real estate market began to cool. Zillow plans to take write-downs of as much as $569 million, according to Bloomberg. The stock, needless to say, is not happy after hours, dropping as much as 10% in extended trading, only to see buyers reel it in to flat as of this writing. And of course, Zillow says they're stopping the home buying right there, and of course it dropped slightly after hours yesterday. In September, Zillow put a record number of homes on the market with the lowest markups since November 2018, according to research from Yipit Data, which also noted that the company had cut prices on almost half of the U.S. listings in the third quarter. In the second quarter, Zillow bought over 3,800 houses towards their stated goal of acquiring 5,000 homes per month by 2024. In Phoenix, 36.5% of properties currently for sale were listed below their purchase price, while the remainder of the 93% started higher only to have price reductions. No word yet on whether or not some magical buyer is going to step in for, what they say, $2.8 billion worth. Hopefully it's not somebody like BlackRock or Blackstone or one of those outfits. Hopefully the middle class does not get priced out of the market. So outside of that, Bed Bath & Beyond shares surge 100% after buyback announcement and a Kroger deal. Bed Bath & Beyond shares surged after the close on Tuesday as the company announced, amid a flood of earnings reports from other companies, that it planned to complete its $1 billion 3-year share buyback plan by the end of this year, 2 years ahead of schedule. The company plans to buy the remaining $400 million in shares left of its buyback program by the end of the year. The news sent shares of the company up 100% after a session that has seen manic moves in shares of several companies, including several other meme stocks. And of course, here we see the rapid uptick here at day's end. So the company also announced a new partnership with supermarket Kroger that will allow Bed Bath & Beyond and Bye Bye Baby goods to be sold on Kroger's website and in certain stores starting next year. The company also named Anu Gupta as Chief Growth Officer, a newly created position. She previously served in another executive-level position. The rally sent shares up 100% in after-hours trading, leaving them at their highest level in roughly a month. Curiously, the company doesn't have a large contingent of short sellers selling its stock short, making the magnitude of the move all the more unusual. Says, imagine what would have happened if the company announced plans to buy 100,000 Teslas. Yeah, exactly. And all that flap that's been going back and forth between Elon Musk and Hertz, and even the knock-on effect with Avis here recently. Read the full press release below. I think we'll forego that, but bottom line, looks like Bed Bath & Beyond is going to start a partnership, and of course, hey, what better way to fatten the pockets of your top brass than, just buying back some stocks? Yeah, usually if you don't have the revenue, well, better way to prop things up than just doing the old tried and true stock buyback program, right? So outside of that, talked a lot about what's been playing out across the world with energy and coal and natural gas, and of course all the backdrop of all this is the old COP26 and the browbeating and castigating and virtue signaling and everything else that's been going on. In the meantime, reality hits with this as whack-a-mole. China LNG prices soar to a new record, crushing distributor margins. Says there is one recurring problem with central planning. The greater the level of intervention, the worse and more widespread the unexpected adverse consequences. Just last week, when we reported that Beijing had imposed price controls on its coal rationing, we said that the problem with such explicit subsidies, which create an artificially low price, is that they don't address the underlying problems: too much demand, not enough supply, but instead accelerate hoarding and lead to a run on the artificially underpriced commodity, forcing spikes in another energy commodity, while resulting in an even faster drain of the commodity in question, in this case, coal. In essence, it's like a giant game of whack-a-mole. Just earlier today, we reported of precisely one such outcome when we discussed how China had inadvertently sparked panic buying after telling households to stockpile food ahead of the winter. This comes days after we reported that China's coal and natural gas energy crisis had quietly spread, with many gas stations across the country running out of diesel due to supply constraints caused by the surging demand for subsidized coal. And now we have another example of central planning's unintended whack-a-mole consequences. Bloomberg reports that domestic liquefied natural gas prices in China are surging, driven by soaring prices in the international market, adding pressure on downstream city gas distributors. The national average price for the fuel carried by trucks to factories or vehicles refueling stations surged to a record 7,814 won per ton, or about 26 bucks per million British thermal units, on Monday, up almost 100% from a year ago, according to the Shanghai's Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange. In Beijing, prices saw a single-day jump of 1,000 won a ton on Monday, according to the CTL Group, a research unit of gas distributor ENN Group. The price surge comes as importers tried to compensate for the rising cost of liquid natural gas imports. While China regulates the price of natural gas sold through pipelines, trucked LNG can rise and fall based on market forces. According to Wantalks, Chai Shupeng, chief financial officer of state-owned energy giant PetroChina, said at its earnings conference call on October 29th that, given the rising prices of LNG imports, PetroChina recorded a loss of 6.4 billion won for gas imports in the third quarter, bringing its total loss in the first 3 quarters of the year on gas imports to 3.2 billion won. China said that we will supply natural gas at contract prices to downstream companies, including those that have signed long-term supply agreements with us. But for other companies, we will have to sell gas at prices based on our purchases prices. While upstream resources companies plan to pass on rising costs to downstream companies, it's difficult for downstream city gas distributors to pass on the rising prices to end users. Li Yalan, chairwoman of Beijing Gas Group, said at a gas industry forum on October 27th, the problems faced by gas distributors this year are different from previous years, and much more efforts are needed to purchase resources and balance resources. Surging gas prices are unlikely to be transmitted to end users, and that is causing serious problems for gas distributors, whose gas purchasing prices are higher than selling prices. Gas distributors have to absorb the burden themselves, said Li, although we are confident that unless Beijing intervenes yet again, distributors will do everything in their power to make sure others foot the soaring bill. Meanwhile, as reported previously, some factions in gas-reliant sectors such as ceramics and fertilizers have already had supplies restricted in order to conserve fuel for home heating. Those that can get it will pay more. The cost for gas feedstock at ceramics factories in Guangdong and Jiangxi have nearly doubled, according to industry publication Ceramic Information. The gas surge is coming just as a jump in coal prices is relaxing. Action by China's authorities to boost output has helped ease a crunch on supply that's contributed to power shortages and crimped output in some key industries. And here we see the graphic of the China thermal coal futures net from their peak, look like maybe early part of October on down. Says thermal coal futures on the Zhangzhou Commodity Exchange fell 2.8% to close at 891.8 won, or about 139 bucks on Tuesday. pairing an earlier drop of as much as 8.4% that brought the price to the lowest since August. Alas, as the LNG example shows, unless Beijing successfully manages to plug all the holes where the mole can emerge, this strategy merely exacerbates an already unprecedented crisis. And the longer the state intervenes in price discovery, the worse the final outcome. Right? So, central planning, does that always work? No, of course not. Let the market do its thing. That's what capitalism is supposed to do, not this socialist intervention of crony capitalism, right? And of course, mind you, again, with COP in the backdrop, yeah, we'll see whether or not Xi Jinping and company over in China decide they want to bow to the West, I suppose, and yield to all these carbon taxes and cutting of carbon and everything else. In the meantime, they deal with this. So, aside from that, still over in China, iron ore futures stumble sub $100 as China steel output slumps. And of course, what's the knock-on effect of that? Well, how many cars do you think we're going to be able to build if we don't have China's steel imports flowing through the borders to build such products? Just a thought. Iron ore futures in Singapore dove under $100 per ton Tuesday, as Chinese steel output in October recorded its lowest level since March 2020, signaling increasing economic headwinds for the world's second largest economy. Futures for iron ore tumbled for a fifth day as Beijing increased efforts to cap annual steel volumes. Production curbs have been more frequent in the back half of the year, as prices have been more than halved since summer. Beijing wants to ensure smelters do not smog up the skies during the Winter Olympics, expected to take place in the first quarter of 2022. According to Bloomberg, quoting researcher MySteel, who analyzed 247 blast furnaces and 71 electric arc furnaces, daily steel output in October dropped to the lowest since March 2020. There were frequent requests from local governments to curb production, while lackluster steel demand and softening prices have dampened mills' willingness to produce, MySteel said. The probability that iron ore demand slides by at least 20% in the fourth quarter is increasing, judging from lower downstream demand, said Orient Futures company analyst Zhu Humin. We have to monitor if mills will actually reduce production on their own, which will worsen the market a step further. Since summer, prices in Singapore have slid by more than 50% on China's push to curb emissions in energy-intensive industries. China's real estate market, a top buyer of steel, is under strain from a government crackdown that has pared down leverage in the industry. The decline of iron ore futures has followed the decline in top property developer Evergrande Group's 2023, 2024, and 2025 bonds. The Evergrande debt debacle has spread across China's entire property market, causing contagion among other highly leveraged developers. Credit agencies have downgraded highly leveraged companies operating in the space. Many of these companies are pulling back on building, which means that their demand for commodities such as steel, copper, cement, and plastics declines. The slowdown in China has resulted in significant declines for miners, such as Rio Tinto Group, shares headed for their lowest since May 2020. The official Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index slipped for a second month in a contraction, under the 50 mark. How long until the PBOC makes its reign to save the Chinese economy? Good question. And of course, we still have yet to see the full effects of Evergrande and that imploding. They barely eked out making their bond payments net to pair those here in recent weeks. And of course, they've got some coupons net that are coming due throughout the next several months. So something to keep an eye on. So outside of that, will Ukraine run out of energy soon? Good question. We know that as discussed by way of China, India in recent weeks, here today even, Europe having some similar issues, Ukraine apparently in the same boat. We get this out of South Front here today. It says, over the past months, Ukrainian politicians have been persistently throwing red meat to Moscow through the acts of aggression against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. the recent escalation of the conflict in Donbass with the use of UAVs, and the pressure on Ukrainian politician Medvedchuk, who is considered pro-Russian. All these actions had a shared ultimate objective and were aimed at forcing concessions from Moscow on issues of the Minsk agreements, Crimea's status, and natural gas transit, especially considering Nord Stream 2. Some Ukrainian experts warned about the danger of this plan, because in fact there were many risks for Ukraine, and there were almost no counterarguments in case of offensive reaction from the Kremlin. For now, we can observe that the situation in the energy sector is following the worst-case scenario for Kiev. On November 1st, Russia suspended coal exports to Ukraine that can be regarded as more than depressing news for the country in the context of the energy crisis in Europe. According to the statistics from the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy, up to October 10th, the coal stocks in warehouses of thermal power plants were estimated at 623.7 thousand tons that meet the needs for just 7 to 10 days of work. The demand for electricity is connected to the temperature, and it will continue to grow because of the upcoming winter. Electricity consumption has already increased by 2.8% to 408 million kilowatt hours, as the Ministry of Energy stated. At the same time, the world community is facing huge problems related to the depletion of coal reserves. Due to the global shortage of this type of fuel, the price is breaking records in the foreign markets, reaching $250 a ton. In addition to the price issue, it is extremely difficult to find out coal available for distribution in the market. As for the imports to Ukraine, on average, 670,000 tons of Russian coal are shipped per month, while consumption at Ukrainian power plants amounts to 1.8 million tons a month. Thus, Ukrainian thermal power plants will be deprived of a third of their needs in coal amid acute shortage of this resource. The second point stands for usage of this coal at many Ukrainian power plants, such as Luhanska, Slavyanska, Kiryavska, Dmitska, Sumska, and let's try Chernihivska. There we go. Thus, for now, it's apparent that these plants risk being completely stopped as the overall level of generation in the country falls to critical levels. Ukraine also faces challenges with an acute shortage of gas. The price per 1,000 cubic meters for public institutions has already reached $1,700, and the start of the heating season remains questionable. Gas prices for households have undergone manifold increases, and this happens against the backdrop of increased re-exports to European countries. In effect, the Ukrainian company Naftogaz signed a framework agreement with the Moldovan company Energocom on supply of 700 million cubic meters of gas. This decision from the Ukrainian side arises several arguable questions. Does Ukraine have so much gas to resell, and does the Republic of Moldova have enough money, approximately $1 billion, to pay for energy supplies? Ukraine's rhetoric about its energy independence from Russia sound less and less convincing at the time of fuel starvation in the country, while the objective reality dictates its own terms. As a result of the auction, which was held according to the Ukrainian Legislative Reserve procedure on October 27th, 8 Ukrainian energy supply companies have fully purchased access to the interstate cross-section at the border with Russia for November 2021. This means that several companies controlled by oligarchs will organize the purchase of electricity from Russia and deliver it to Ukraine at resale prices, proving that there is no energy sovereignty or any other sovereignty of Ukraine. Russian motives for not completely cutting Kiev off from energy supplies are clear. Moscow is not interested in completely disintegrating Ukraine as a state, as it could only worsen the unstable situation near its western borders. At the same time, actions of the Ukrainian side can be regarded as irrational due to the external management of the Kiev regime by Euro-Atlantic elites, and the Ukrainian authorities choose to take risks even if their country is close to being considered a failed state. For the European community, this means a risk of further deterioration of the already unstable political situation, with such consequences as increasing refugee flows, disrupted supply chains, worsening criminality in the region, and the cost of peacekeeping process. So interesting. Nord Stream 2 obviously still has yet to come fully online. We've watched that play out here over the course of the last several months. And of course, this also has an effect on Ukraine. And as the article mentions here, not looking good in regards to energy supplies and the control that Russia has over the distribution of said supplies. So, something to keep an eye on. All right, well, back to the U.S. here. Strong ADP print for October opens a door for Powell's taper. This come through just a little bit ago. Says ADP reports that 571,000 jobs were added in October, well above the 400,000 expected. But we note September's 568,000 print was revised significantly lower to 523,000. So 568 is what they originally printed, got knocked down by about 45,000, is it? And so if they're coming in hot with 571, well, chances are, my guess, come December, that'll probably also get revised down, especially in light of what is playing out across the country with all these mandates, right? It says the labor market showed renewed momentum last month with a jump from the third quarter average of 385,000 monthly jobs added, marking nearly 5 million job gains this year, said Neela Richardson, chief economist at ADP. Service sector providers led the increase, and the goods sector gains were broad-based, reporting the strongest reading of the year. Large companies fueled the stronger recovery in October, marking the second straight month of impressive growth. Once again, service jobs, up 458,000, dominated goods producing jobs, up 113,000. So here we see from July, August, September, October, we're on a nice little upward trend here. Question is that going to get revised down? Are we going to start to cycle back the other way? We'll have to see. It says all sectors saw job gains. So per their print here, October 21 report highlights. By company size, let's see, 115,000 added small business, 114 in medium, 342,000 in large businesses. Goods producing sector up 113. Natural resources, mining up 6. Construction up 54. Manufacturing up 53. Service providing up 458,000. You can kind of see the breakdown of that as well. Says the job market is revving back up as the Delta wave of the pandemic winds down, Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, said in a statement. As long as the pandemic remains contained, more big job gains are likely in coming months. Large firms dominated the job additions, but small firms are coming back strong. And here they highlight the numbers Nat just referenced, 115,000 jobs in October for small firms, medium firms 114, and 500 and above employees, adding 342,000 jobs. The strong ADP print provides more support for Powell to unleash the taper later today. Now think of that in the context of the story I just talked about with Mike Rowe and skill shortages, right? How does that square? Where are all these jobs actually going if, we have no ability to transport goods or build houses or do whatever, right? And then on top of that, let's take a look at what's still playing out in LA Long Beach. We've still got a whole pile of container ships sitting there waiting to be offloaded, and no real incentive, by the way, for these folks to move them any faster than what's already being done. Even though he had somebody like Joe promise, hey, these things are going to go to 24/7 operations. But yet, things still aren't improving, are they? No. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as well. All right, so aside from that, let's jump over to what took place last night. Pretty busy day by way of elections around the country, various races net going on. Have more to say about that here a little bit later on today as well. But it's been a bloodbath. New Jersey governor's race still too close to call as voters punish Dems for leftward shift, and rightfully so. says if the off-year election of 2021 truly was a proxy for the public's feelings towards President Biden and the Dems, then the Dems have officially been warned. Their shallow electoral mandate is already collapsing, and the midterms are still a year off. Because the Dems had a worse Tuesday night than the Houston Astros, a sign that voters are pushing back against the party's increasingly leftward drift. And by leftward drift, we mean socialism, Marxism, communism. Not only did Republican political newcomer Glenn Youngkin wax former Dem governor and Clinton pal Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, but in New Jersey, what was supposed to be an easy re-election victory for governor and former Goldman Sachs employee Phil Murphy has turned into a political dogfight, with neither Murphy nor his GOP rival Jack Chiaratelli able to claim victory after a long night of ballot counting. Both spoke to supporters in post-midnight speeches, but the mood of deflation felt by the Dems was difficult to ignore. And while the pundits are still clinging to the notion that Murphy will clinch re-election, after all, he had a massive advantage, including 1 million more registered voters and far more cash in his campaign coffers than his GOP rival, the race is still neck and neck. Here we see out of Steve Chernosky says, based on the counties that are outstanding, I would think Murphy squeaks by with a narrow victory. So to be determined. According to NJ.com, as of 5:45 Eastern Time Wednesday, it's possible the gubernatorial race in the Garden State may not be decided Wednesday. With 98% of the precincts in, Chiaratelli, a former member of the state assembly, was leading Murphy by about 1,200 votes, according to totals from the Associated Press. That amounted to 49.7% for Chiaratelli and 49.6% for Murphy. To be sure, thousands of votes, many from Dem-leaning counties, remain uncounted. Meanwhile, the difference in tone between Chiaratelli and Murphy was palpable in their election night speeches. So we'll let a little bit of this play through.
You know what? I want Jack too.
Me too.
You've been here, some of you have been here for 5 hours. The headquarters for Phil Murphy is empty. You've been with me for the 22 months that I've been a candidate for governor. Every time the press has asked me, where do you get your energy? I said, where do I get my energy? Take a look at the people showing up at these rallies. You guys are the fuel in my tank. You're the wind in my sails. You're my energy source. Keep it coming. I wanted to come out here tonight because I had prepared one hell of a victory speech. I wanted to come out here tonight and tell you that we had won. I'm here to tell you that we're winning. We're winning. Marlon, I see you, Marlon. The Black Caucus is in the room.
All right, we'll pause from that one there. That one's a little bit lengthy. It says, now Murphy, who clearly feels entitled to re-election after serving as governor through the COVID scamdemic, after imposing some of the most unnecessary policies that clearly scared thousands of Dems into vote absentee, or perhaps staying home entirely.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Greetings from Asbury Park. Hey, thank you all so much for sticking around. Well, we're going to have to wait a little while longer than we had hoped. We're going to wait for every vote to be counted, and that's how our democracy works. For almost 4 years now, our focus has not been on trying to do more for those who already have much, but to do much for those in the middle and at the bottom so that they have more opportunity. Our cause has not been looking out for people gathered around a corporate board table, but for the family gathered around their kitchen table, like mine growing up. Our mission has been simple: to build a state where every child, regardless of race or gender, creed or zip code, has the opportunity to live out their hopes and achieve their American dream. These are the values we've put to work. We're leading with compassion and empathy, not anger and despair. We're following science and facts, not the political winds. We may not always agree, but when we disagree, we sit down and we treat each other with respect and understanding, always seeking common ground. Our shared values are far more important than any one person. What we can already take from tonight is knowing that many of our friends and neighbors like us do not want to go backward. To Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver.
All right, that's about enough of that shenanigans. Yeah, shared values and our democracy. We don't want to go backwards. We'll just throw your parents and that who are of age and so forth, just like we did under the scamdemic, back into those nursing homes, right? Back in Virginia, voters celebrated the Youngkins win with "Let's Go Brandon" chants in a generally excitable crowd.
This is Glenn Youngkin. He is the projected winner for the governorship of the Commonwealth of Virginia. He will momentarily address this crowd. Let's listen in.
Thank you. Wow. Amazing. Woo! All righty, Virginia, we won this thing. How much fun? How much fun? First of all, thank you all for waiting a few minutes longer than we thought to. Breakfast will be served shortly. Amazing. God. Well, first, let me thank Suzanne. Just, oh. I have said many, many times that the Lord knew what he was doing, because I need her a lot more than she needs me. When I told you on that fateful Friday afternoon that a conviction had come over my heart to go serve Virginians, you did respond. You responded with grace. You responded with support. You responded with unconditional love. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we'll pause that there. What I find interesting is how quickly that race tightened up, because earlier in the night when they called it, I believe he was up by 10 percentage points at the time, and yet the graphic net shown by MSDNC here shows that it had closed up to within about 3%. Very interesting. Offering some insight into how Youngkin managed to pull off a victory, unlike Clinton crony McAuliffe, Youngkin actually inspired voters to show up to the polls. George Perrick says, here is a wild stat. In the 17 counties west of Roanoke, basically the bottom left tail of the state on a map, Youngkin netted an extra 40,000 votes compared to Gillespie in 2017. He did it entirely through the turnout. Dem votes were almost exactly flat. GOP votes up 40%. And if you remember, I think here within the last couple days, I think I had an article that said that Trump said if his base turned out that he would win. So perhaps the Trump base did exactly that. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, the city where George Floyd was killed by Officer Derek Chauvin, setting off last summer's wave of riots and demonstrations, Voters in the city rejected a proposal to abolish the city's police department and replace it with a quote-unquote public safety department focused on a comprehensive public health approach. In New York City, the election went largely as expected, with former police officer and moderate Democrat Eric Adams emerging victorious, although many believe the race was decided months ago when Adams clinched victory in the Democratic primary. At any rate, Adams' GOP rival Curtis Sliwa, whatever, the founder of the Guardian Angels, showed up to vote with one of his 17 cats. Interesting. Derek Adams romps home to victory in the race for New York City mayor, beating out Republican rival Curtis Sliwa, who turned up to vote for himself with one of his 17 cats. Circling back to Virginia for a moment, not only did voters reject McAuliffe and back GOP Youngkin, they also backed Republican Winsome Sears, a black woman, an immigrant from Jamaica and former Marine, to be the state's next lieutenant governor. Sears defeated Democrat Hala Ayala, winning just over 51.2% of the vote to Ayala's 48.8%, according to local NBC affiliate. While a woman of color was slated to take the lieutenant governor position, regardless of who won, first in Virginia history, Sears won the thing, becoming the first black woman to be elected to any statewide office in Virginia, cementing a historic vote. So there you have it. Does she look like a white supremacist to you? No, just somebody toting an AR. That's all. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, clearly voters are uncomfortable with the Dems' courting of the progressive left, especially when it comes to issues like whether CRT should be taught in schools. Also, as Axios notes, Dems are about to engage in a serious game of finger-pointing, since even with former President Trump largely silenced thanks to a social media blackout, they still couldn't manage to win a solid victory in an off-year vote. The vote may be a wake-up call for the Dems' congressional leadership to push for swift passage of the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, a partisan deal passed by the Senate over the summer, but which has been held up by progressives, who are demanding that Biden's social agenda, a package that currently stands at about $1.75 trillion, see a vote first, for fear that it might collapse, or see massive cutbacks, without the carrot of the infrastructure bill. Clearly, the president's drop in favorability made it very difficult for the Dem nominee to stay above water. Dem Rep. Jerry Connolly told Axios' D.C. Quinette Dill at McAuliffe's election night event in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. As a reminder, here's what President Biden's favorability looks like. Resident Biden, I should say. According to this, it's dipped as low as 42-ish, currently sitting at about 43. I might contest that and say that that's probably actually lower, but that's out of Real Clear Politics. Says, speaking on Rachel Maddow's MSDNC show last night, political analyst Larry Sabato said somebody from McAuliffe's camp described the race in Virginia a bloodbath for the Dems.
To a lean Republican prediction on this race. Mr. Sabato, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for making time.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks so much.
I want to ask you, I'll warn you in advance, I want to ask you a little bit about what's going on in the House of Delegates tonight, because if Glenn Youngkin is potentially going to pull this out and be the new Republican governor of Virginia, whether or not he's able to govern with Republican Party principles, well, the legislature will have a lot to do with that. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. But looking at the governor's race and this top-line marquee race, what do you think the story is here tonight thus far?
The story is, I'm not going to call it a blowout because we don't have the final numbers, but I will tell you somebody in high up in McAuliffe's camp who was there with McAuliffe put it this way to me about an hour ago. It's a bloodbath. And so far, everything we've seen pretty much falls along that line. And while we don't have complete figures, anything close to complete figures for the House of Delegates, you can guess based on what I've just said.
Given the distance that Republicans had to come in order to pull this off tonight,
So there you have it, a bloodbath. Yes, let's hope that continues, as while they might try to brush it off as an off-year fluke, the Dems know the implication of Tuesday night's vote. After all, Kamala Harris herself said the following about last night's vote in Virginia. It is a bellwether for what happens in the rest of the country. What happens in Virginia will in large part determine what happens in 2022, 2024, and on. But a congressional aide put it far more bluntly in an anonymous quote to Axios. It's time for Democrats to stop effing around and show the voters we actually can govern. Another senior aide said it's insanely clear the party must change its focus not on center-left or progressive goals, but on what gets real things done for families. At this point, President Biden has signed a lot of executive orders, but what has his administration actually accomplished? Not a damn thing. Nor has Congress, have they? Bunch of fiats, decrees, mandates, as if we have a king in this country, which we do not. And it's time for people to stand up and take back the country, especially against those who are pushing all this mandate and abiding in it, by the way, for which there is nothing on the record stating that any mandate even exists. No executive order, nothing on the books, nothing by way of OSHA, but yet, in the meantime, the corporations continue to push. Right? So, aside from that, if you were with me yesterday, appreciate you joining. I did manage to get the full show and that uploaded to a couple platforms yesterday. If you're with me yesterday, I started a little bit early, and I did show in its entirety Senator Johnson's expert panel on medical mandates and vaccine injuries. It is worth the watch. I'll go ahead and drop the link out there in chat for you guys if you wish to check that out. It is up on Rumble. It is over on YouTube. Wasn't able to get it up on Gab TV. Had a little bit of an issue trying to get that there. So for the meantime, you guys can check that out there. And yeah, it is definitely worth watching. Pretty gut-wrenching to watch a lot of these folks and that come through yesterday, give their voices a chance to be heard in front of folks. And do share this out. Get it out far and wide. I think whether you love or hate Senator Johnson, I give him kudos and commend him for doing what he's done to give these folks a voice. By the way, he did invite Big Pharma CEOs. He did invite Fauci. He did invite Valensky and company over at the CDC, FDA. And guess how many showed up? 0. Absolutely none. None of them bothered. And of course, I close the broadcast with a question, right? Is it their arrogance or pride and hubris because they're wrong? Or is it something else? Either way, time will tell. So I'll drop that out there, get that out to you guys. Check it out. Be sure, like I said, to like, share, pass that around. It is very revealing. Many of the folks that were on the panel yesterday were not anti-vaxxers either. Many of these had been pro-vax. Many of these have already taken the vax, were big-time believers in the vaccine, and found out that obviously this had some severe implications. So that is going to do it for the broadcast this morning. I'll have a lot more to say here a little bit later on. Follow me over to the old 5x5 channel kicking off at 3 p.m. this afternoon. We'll have our normal lineup of characters here today. Hopefully we're going full song with everybody back, including Sunny Days. And we'll give that a go here this afternoon, and we'll see you then. Take care. God bless everybody.